All right. Welcome back, everybody, to another Future Focus where we are living at the intersection of business, technology, and the human experience with the stated goal of keeping you 10 steps ahead. So we will see if we pull that off today. I'm looking forward to the conversation because if you saw the headline, initially this discussion was going to be framed around really the scaling of technical skill sets, which I think is extremely important when we think about all that's going on in the technical space and the disruption there. But I think regardless of whether you're technical talent or not, you're going to find tremendous value in this because we're going to be talking about what it really looks like to navigate this rise in AI integration into our work. And what does it mean for us as people? And what do our roles look like? How do our skills look like? And how do we adapt? So, who better to have that conversation with me than Mark Herschberg, who, hey, you know what? I nailed your name on the first try, which is super great. And he's a CTO, technical dude, but he's specialized in the AI space, but he also has a heart for career development and skill development. So we're going to just talk candidly about what's really going on and what we all can be doing to make the most of this very disruptive time, whether it's for ourselves or as leaders, how we think about it for our team. So thank you so much, Mark, for joining me.
Thanks for having me. It is my pleasure to be here.
Yeah, well, so for folks who may not know you, I gave you the quick rundown, but tell me and everybody else a little bit more. And I'm going to probe on some of this stuff because backstage you shared a few details that I want to lean into this a bit.
Here's my quick background. Now, I have this dual track career. I graduated from MIT back in the 90s. I have a couple degrees, physics, computer science, my graduate work in cryptography, cybersecurity, secret codes.
Okay.
I started out as a software engineer in the mid to late 90s.
Okay.
And went through a path. I said, I want to become a CTO. And so I went on that path.
Was that a thing in the mid 90s? Like you already were like, that's what I want to do.
I recognize I want to be the technical leader. We did have CTO. CIO was a slightly more common term, but in the startup world, CTO, I'm like, hey, here's this term.
That's okay, because those all the C-suite terms, right? They've all been on their evolution. I was like, really, late 90s, they already had CTO. But okay, got it. All right. So you knew where you were headed.
I knew where I was headed. And I've achieved that. Now, I've done mostly tech startups. I've spent some time in academia, as we'll talk about in a moment, and then also helped a few Fortune 500s play startup, where I said, we want to innovate.
Okay.
And I've been in many different fields, labor marketplaces, videos, lead gen, ad tech. Lately, AI is a hot thing. I've got a lot
of kind of a big deal right now.
Yeah. In AI, I've got a lot of my patents recently have been AI applications. I've developed a lot of IP over the years. So I have that career. But when I recognized that I wanted to become a CTO, I quickly realized that to do that, it wasn't about being the best engineer. Yes, I had to be good at those tech skills, but there were these other skills I would need: leadership, networking, negotiation, team building, communication, hiring people. I knew of these skills, but no one ever taught them to me. So I began to upskill myself. I realized these skills apply to everyone. I began to upskill my team. And as I was doing that, MIT had gotten feedback. Companies were saying, we want these skills, not just in your students, not just engineers, everyone, but we can't find these skills. So MIT wanted to put together a program. I got roped into it. And now for the past about 24 years almost, I have been teaching at MIT's Career Success Accelerator in parallel to my primary job. And then that led to the Career Toolkit book, the speaking, the Brain Bump app, and other things in my second parallel career.
Okay. So before we get two things that jump out, one of these, the first thing is, I think a lot of the conversations and a lot of the stuff I see right now about human skills, power skills, the need for this, the gaps that we have, the gaps we need to close. You would get the impression, if you were just to read headlines, that this is all a brand new thing. But it's interesting hearing from you that, and this has been my experience as well, this isn't new, what we're talking about right now. And even what you said, where being a really strong technical leader, yes, you needed to be good at the technical side of it, but that wasn't really the differentiator that made you successful. It was like, you can only go so far with that, but then it's this other portfolio of skills that actually will propel you beyond, just kind of where you are right there. So I think it's interesting hearing that from your experience as well, that it's like, okay, this isn't, and I actually think regardless of whether you're technical, people I know in all sorts of functions, all sorts of industries, similar type things. I was like, yeah, some of the most successful people I know were like, I was pretty good at it, but actually I focused my effort on these other skills, and that's what made me successful. I just needed to be able to be good enough to know what I was doing and understand how the pieces worked so I could lead some of the other folks who maybe were even better than I was.
There was a book from the 80s called Peopleware, Productive Projects and Teams.
Sounds like an 80s title.
There's not a line of code in the book. It is about the people skills matter for successful software. And I recommend this to everyone, not just software people. But if I may, to what you were saying about it's these other skills that help, here's an analogy I use with my students. And I've used this with many people. We're going to do a little bit of math for a moment. We're going to go back to 6th grade. Imagine you've got a rectangle that's 4 by 10. And you have to increase one of the sides by 2 units to maximize the area. And if you're listening on the replay and need to pause, feel free.
Get out your scratch paper. This is one of those academic exercises back like when I did middle school math, where it's like, get out your scratch pads, everybody. We're going to write this one down.
Now, the answer is we put the 2 units on the short side. We go from 4 to 6 for 60 units. The other way is 48. If you think about what's happening conceptually, those 2 units on the short side are being amplified by the 10. If you put the 2 units on the 10, it's only amplified by the 4.
Yeah.
All of us have long sides and short sides, typically more than 2. We focus on our long sides, and we need to. I'm in technology. If I'm not paying attention to new technology, I'd still be writing in Fortran. I'd be a little out of date. So you do have to keep up with those long sides.
Yeah.
But the ROI that you get by focusing on your short sides. Imagine, for example, someone who might be really technical. And this guy, he is a technical genius. But to listen to him, it's really hard to follow. He uses lots of jargon. And unless you're at his level, you can't follow it. He's not an effective communicator. So if we can help him with his short side, communicate a little better, which is his overall effectiveness, and per unit time, he starts to succeed a lot more. So we want to focus on our short sides as well as our long.
And what I like about the balance you bring to this, because this resonates with some of the conversations I have. And again, I think where I've seen a lot of disruption recently is in some of the technical spheres because of how quickly AI has adapted to being able to write, edit, manage code, things like that. But when I've talked to some of my more technical friends, even they have said, the ones who have made the mistake have said, well, I don't need to even worry about that anymore. The AI is going to take care of it. And I like the balance you bring where it's like, oh, no. You still need to stay current. And on top of that, it's just the time investment you make on it is lesser because it's more about making sure that you're going deep enough and staying current enough, but you're going to get the exponential dividends on these other pieces. And so I do appreciate that balance because you can't just abandon one and go, oh, I'm just going to stick to it'd be like if you decided you were going to stick to, doing your ledgers in a notepad versus using Excel in finance. And you're like, I don't need to learn anything else. I've learned everything I need to know about finance.
Exactly. We're going to have to keep all these different sides need to be developed. And it's just at this moment in time for the next challenge you're facing in your career, where do you get that best optimization?
Yeah. So as we transition into some of this disruptive stuff, so obviously you're playing heavily in the technical space and seeing some of this. I mean, where are you seeing, because we talked about it a little bit backstage on how in some ways, and I said this on, I think it was 2 weeks ago on a podcast, I was like, in some ways AI is changing everything. And in some ways AI is changing nothing. So I'm curious from your vantage point, as you look at some of this stuff, where are you seeing some of the biggest, as you're working with organizations, where are you actually starting to see this from an adoption and an adaptation start to kick in, and it is starting to maybe ruffle feathers?
We're seeing the easy things, the low-hanging fruit being automated.
Okay.
And there's some good ways and bad ways this is being done. Many of us are getting a lot more spam now because all these sales outreach emails, they're just hitting the spam, auto-generate, and they think they're being clever because they looked at your LinkedIn profile. I keep getting, we love the work you're doing at A, B, and job C from 20 years ago,
Right.
as if I'm doing this now.
Yeah.
So we're seeing things like that. We see within the workplace, the rote tasks can now get automated away at a more efficient level. Just like, to use Excel that you brought up earlier, I don't have to tally columns by hand, and I can suddenly create tables and generate data much more quickly. We're getting to the equivalent version a lot more with text, and then even conceptually with other things. But this is still the rote work. And what we're going to start to see, we're recording this in late spring 2024.
Yeah.
I always give the time because this will change.
I know. I swear, every week I do one of these, and I'm like, if you listened to me 2 weeks ago, yeah, it might not be the same point of view I would give now.
We're going to see it start to crawl up the value chain. So here's an example of what that means and what it means for how we think about our roles. If you are a lawyer and you go back 20 some years, your job was to listen to the client's issue, determine a course of action, and let's say it involves some legal documentation, whether you're filing court papers or you're just trying to send off some angry letters. And you think about, okay, I need to do this type of document, and you create that document from whole cloth. Maybe you've got a template, and then you're thinking, well, here's the strategy we're going to use. I have to perhaps reference existing case law and put that in. And it's just a lot of work. Now, over the years, we've made finding that case law easier. The databases and their searches have said, oh, we can help you better find the case law. We're going to cut down the amount of time it takes to find the case law. And
there's still a lot, there's still historically still been a lot of manual labor involved in that, which is why you have legal assistants and things like that of like, yeah, it's easier to find this stuff, but we still got to go find it, pull it into these documents, do all this other stuff. I mean, it's still pretty time consuming.
But if you look at, and I don't know if anyone's actually charted this, someone must have, the overall time spent decreases, and or the quality of case law you get or the amount of case law you get per unit time increases. So we're getting a better ROI. If you think, for example, when we think about TVs, the government, when they measure inflation, they look at the TV and say, your TV may cost the same as it did 10 years ago, even adjusting for inflation. But today's TV is bigger. Today's TV has more features, and we consider that an improvement, and we'll calculate that into inflation. So same thing, that they might be doing the same amount of effort, but they're getting a better return for that effort, or it's less effort.
Okay.
But so finding existing case law is one piece. You've got putting it into the template, and those templates have gotten better, have gotten more flexible as well. So that's also faster. And this will continue to be automated. So we're going to see the same thing in similar tasks in other roles. But where we're going to, I think, see it go, because you can imagine that people with less experience can start to pull in the case law just as easily, or automate those templates just as easily. There's already, you and I can file some basic stuff ourselves using legal.
I even think of some things that I used to go to a lawyer for that I don't need to anymore, because it's more like, well, you know, if I just need a draft speaker agreement or something like that, where before I might ask a lawyer to draft one up like this type of a thing, that low risk, things like that, I'm probably not even going to engage with a lawyer anymore, because I can have something like that drafted relatively easy using a generative AI tool.
Exactly. In fact, even before generative AI, there were just the templates where the knowledge sharing across.
Exactly. Yeah, AI, you could just go Google it, find a bunch of them, and then copy and paste, and you saw these Franken. I'd seen many Franken agreements over the years where it was like, you clearly didn't even like put any time into making this read cohesively. This is copy and pasted from 10 different docs.
Which is somewhat what AI does. It's doing the same thing.
It's just doing it a little better.
So where should the lawyer focus? Today, as a lawyer says, the rote mechanics are getting automated away. It's that legal strategy. It's going back to, should we sue them? And if we sue them, what's the tack that we want to use? Are there other legal strategies we can pursue? And it's that higher strategic value that was actually a small percentage because there was just so much bulk rote work. But now we can minimize that and we can focus on the higher value work that's going to deliver more value to the customers.
Yeah. Well, and I think I love that you kind of walked through that example, because sometimes when people hear these things, it can be difficult to think through, yeah, but how? How does this actually work? And backstage, we were talking about how I'm seeing a lot of this happening, especially with some of the advances in healthcare, Gen AI, in terms of, I mean, a lot of healthcare is very mechanical, very laborious in terms of, charting and gathering patient intel, scouring patient health records, doing research into, okay, if these are the symptoms you gave me, I need to go figure out based on this, based on your family history, based on what I know about you, what do I think this might be, so I can put together a treatment protocol. There's a lot of stuff in there that, again, to your point, reduces the value of quality of care that you get, because it's like, well, I've got to see 15 patients in a day. I don't have time to sit and engage in all of this with you. So basically, I'm going to get you in and out as quickly as I can, make some quick assumptions about what I think, and push you out the door. Versus now, if AI can support in a lot of these ways, I actually can spend some more time actually, well, and I think this is where I'm curious your take and how you're seeing companies go with this. Because I think there's two paths that you can take. One necessarily isn't better than the other, but it's a risk. Is you could either go the path of, hey, with all this greater efficiency, let's just jam more into the system. Or you could say, well, let's create a better experience. Let's actually improve quality of care, quality of legal service, things like that. I'm curious where you're seeing organizations make that shift as they start automating some of this stuff.
I think it really depends on the organization, because if
Okay.
you are an organization where you're just trying to do things at scale, then it's more of the how do we just cram more in there.
Okay.
If you're an organization, if your product or service is more, this is higher end value, then it's how do we move up the value chain
Okay.
to provide, we can take our existing fixed resources and provide it for a better ROI for our customers. So I think both are correct. It just depends on your.
Well, that's where I was curious what you're seeing from adoption. If you're seeing companies leaning more towards one or the other, because again, I think it can be tempting to go one way or the other without necessarily thinking through what is going to be a competitive differentiator for us.
The big secret is that most haven't gotten to that point yet.
Okay.
If you talk to companies, they are still in the experimentation phase.
Got
They
it.
have a small group trying it out. They might have people investigating. I get called in a lot to companies saying, can you just spend a month with us or do like some fixed bid project where you come in, look at what we're doing, and tell us how and where we can use AI.
Okay.
And often in cases for smaller businesses, it's no, you're overthinking it. Or guess what? Generative AI, which is really hot and sexy, does not apply to your area.
Yeah.
Just do some basic other existing unsexy stuff. What's now unsexy was sexy 15 years ago, but that's going to help you. And so I think we're still early on the adoption curve.
Okay. It's interesting you bring that point up, because again, I've seen similar things where, despite all the headlines that would give you the impression that everybody's got this cracked and figured out and everybody's adopting this left and right and going back and forth, there is still a lot of, we aren't really sure what we're doing with this. And one of the things that I've actually found interesting is um, a lot of the skeletons of the broken operations and processes and dysfunction of organizations are starting to come out in some of these explorations like you described. Because if you're just trying to throw AI on top of what you're doing today, it can actually cause and exacerbate problems in the system. And actually, a lot of folks that I end up talking to, it ends up being like, we maybe need to go back and map what it is you're doing and how that actually works first, because that's not super clear. And so we need to do that hard work that you've been putting off for the last 10 years, because you just were like, I don't know, it's fine. And we don't really need to think about it.
What you described is not an AI problem, it's a technology problem. So often I see companies that built software before they understood their process, and now the software is misaligned and they have to adjust their process to fit into the software.
Yeah.
Before you apply any technology, classic software, AI, big data, whatever is going to be next. Define your business process. Make sure that is clear. And then you want technology to automate that process, because when you're doing the wrong thing, technology just lets you do the wrong thing faster.
Faster. Yeah. It allows you to scale your problems, actually, is exactly what we're getting at. It allows you to scale like you've never dreamed possible. So
But
I am
it's funny.
curious. What's that?
I was gonna say it's funny what you said about what you hear in the headlines versus reality. So another, we're not hearing as much these days, again in 2024. Last year, everyone was talking about prompt engineering, and this is the new sexy job. I
Mhm.
looked into it. One of my most popular articles was prompt engineering jobs are a mirage. I
Yep.
looked at all these different job boards. There were maybe about a dozen or so jobs that included prompt engineering, most of which were, we need a software engineer, and prompt engineering is just one of the things you will do. I found just a tiny handful of actual, we will pay you money to be a prompt engineer. It was this overhyped job. And those of us who are old enough might remember back in the 90s, they talked about all these search experts. Companies are going to have to
Yep.
employ search experts to use all these search engines to find the right thing. That was a mirage too.
Yep.
And we look at history, we look at how other technologies have disrupted us for guidance. In this case, we said, you know what? Everyone overhyped this job. I think prompt engineering is going to be the same thing. And lo and behold, still doesn't exist. And I don't think it ever will in any significant level.
And it's funny you bring that one up, because I do remember as Gen AI first was coming out, like it was, I mean, there was a while it was like they were making degree programs over this whole thing. And you were like, you didn't see people with Google search, director of Google search. It didn't exist because it just became, one, the technology advanced, where it just became more intuitive. I actually was in a conversation, I don't remember when I did this, but one of the things that we were talking about when it came to prompt engineering was the fact that really what it's highlighting is your communication skills, is your ability to communicate. What is it you're trying to get AI to do? And what I've actually seen with a lot of people who end up struggling interacting with AI is their ability to communicate what they're trying to do is actually really poor. And as they start to evolve and advance, their ability to describe, to articulate what they need, what's not happening the way they want it, they end up seeing more value come out of it. And it's like, well, that's a communication problem. That's not you need to learn the magic words that, if you structure your prompt exactly like this, you'll be a master of Gen AI.
Welcome to the life of a software engineer, because for years we had product and business people say, "Oh, just build this thing," and they'll give us a 2-sentence description. No, no,
Yeah.
no. That's not what I wanted. You misunderstood. Like, you only said this.
Right,
What
right.
you
And
do?
I've been in those meetings where it's like the product's presented and the customer goes, "That's not what I wanted." And you go, "Well, you gave us 5 bullets. You just said build this." And so we did our best to piecemeal it together, but at the end of the day, you didn't articulate your needs, how it worked. You didn't articulate the workflow, the problems you were trying to solve. And ultimately, again, it goes back to some of these timeless skills, which we'll dig into here, around communication and your ability to interact with others.
And this, by the way, is where you're going to find the real gold in AI. We need a lot of these supporting tools. You have the big companies who are building the LLMs. We need lots of support tools. And one of the areas is some type of interface that helps you better define. Now, whether that will be built by the LLM companies themselves or third parties that will help you better craft statements and
Yeah.
define what you need, that's where there's going to be a lot of value in the coming years.
Well, and I think already we're seeing that gap, kind of like when search first came out. I remember when internet search first came out, you did kind of have to be pretty good at search to find stuff. If you just typed in something and then like Ask Jeeves, but we saw it quickly evolve. All of a sudden you had Ask Jeeves, and then Google came out and you could ask it the way you talked and it would give you better responses. But backstage, I was talking about, I've been toying around with OpenAI's new GPT-4o that just came out. And one of the things that is really interesting about it is its natural language interface that can be voice generated, where you really can speak, and it actually asks follow-up questions in a much more intuitive way, where you're describing what you're trying to do. And if it doesn't have what it needs, it will follow up and it'll ask additional details. Is this what you wanted? Did you consider this kind of a thing? And I think that's where, again, it's going to vastly improve the way we start to interact with it.
So it sounds like the LLMs themselves are starting to claim that space where the next value is.
It seems that because Google just came out, and then, well, actually OpenAI dropped it. Google came on the heels. So I think the LLMs are playing, but I think to your point, I think where we're going to continue to see these specialty technologies come in, and the role people will play is, I mean, I think about some of these big LLMs, they're good at the general stuff. But in highly specialized, like I think about the role of a physician who is in oncology and is really trying to dig into potential treatments for a cancer patient, there is nuance and specificity and considerations that need to be taken into account with that is vastly different than, hey, here's a picture of what's in my fridge. What can I make for dinner that my kids will like? Like the generic versus the highly specialized.
And this is where we were talking about earlier in the green room, centaurs, which we've seen in the chess world. You have human players and good human players. We have grandmasters. And then we have machines, which as of about 15 or 20 years ago could start to beat even the top world players. Yep. But what we find is when we create what's called a centaur, human head, in this case, machine body, it's AI that's guided by a human. And even when it's a mediocre human, it doesn't have to be a grandmaster. That combination tends to beat both the human grandmasters and the top AI by itself. It's a combination of the two because humans can go a little outside the box. Our brains are wired to go, hey, wait, it might be a different paradigm. Whereas the technology says, I'm really good at solving this specific type of problem. And again, it can solve it at scale, but if it's slightly off in its model and its understanding, it's going to solve something that's slightly off and gets further and further off the further it goes.
Yeah.
So humans, for that overall guidance, go a long way.
It is, you know, it's a perfect example. And I think this is where we'll continue to see it go. And I actually, backstage, when you said, are you familiar with centaurs? At first I was like, well, yeah, I mean, I've read Lord of the Rings and I'm familiar with but then I was like, oh, you're talking about the chess thing. And that makes a lot more sense. But to your point, humans do have this dynamic ability. AI doesn't handle exceptions terribly well. And to your point, once it hits an exception, if it gets bent off track, it really struggles to course correct because it's like, well, this is the new direction. And a humorous example I brought up multiple times on the show is, you want to throw an AI driven car off, put a road cone on the hood of it and just watch the thing just completely shut down because it can't, a person would just go, well, there's a cone on the hood. Let me just, boop, knock it off. But to the AI, it's like, this is an emergency. Like there's a cone in front of us, type of a thing. And I think that, to your point, is where this intermingling of the two create a superior product. And the data actually consistently shows that's what we see.
Yeah. So I think we'll see more and more of these hybrids in our own jobs and in our companies.
Well, which goes back to what you brought up before with our, bring back your scratch pads, everybody. With this whole, it's not just you'll only ever invest in one of the four, parts of the box in your professional skill development. You're going to need to develop them in both, because going back to this, it's like, well, you're still going to need to be capable and competent in whatever it is you're pairing. If you're a centaur, you're still going to need to be competent and capable and continuing to develop yourself. You can't just ignore it, or again, some of that benefit you see will start to wane.
And so we need to continue to work individually and within our companies to develop many of these skills, both technical and the timeless non-technical skills that we need to be effective in yesterday's world, today's world, and the new paradigm we're facing.
So on that topic, thank you. You actually just led me right into my transition on this, because I'm actually curious, as you've gone down this path, obviously you were from the start It's funny you said this at the beginning. It's rare I actually encounter someone who says this. I usually joke, "Oh, did you imagine you'd be a CTO in your early years?" You were like, "Yep." Yes, I did. Normally it's like, "No, I was doing this and I had no idea." But what were some of these things? Because I know that oftentimes these timeless, these human, these power, whatever word you want, durable. I mean, there's so many terms for them. What were some of the ones that you've observed, especially coming at it through the lens of a technical field where I can see historically that may not have been prioritized? It was like, well, we need to make sure you're the master of, these programming languages and computer science fundamentals and understanding all the intricacies of this. What were some of those things that you've now baked into what you're doing with Career Toolkit that are designed to help, whether you're a technical professional or a non-technical professional, actually kind of supersede?
And to be fair, if you had asked me, do you think you'd ever write a book? I would have said no. Said, do you think you'd be really focused on soft skills? I would have said, heck no,
Yeah.
no chance at all. So there's certainly some paths unexpected in my career. The skills, you can find these lists all sorts of places. And I've seen lists that range from 5 to 50 in size. It's really about where you're drawing the lines. How big are the buckets you're drawing? So here are the 10 buckets that I chose to define. Again, these skills, this isn't Mark said these are the skills. This comes from lots of research, academic research, industry research. And I've drawn them into 10 buckets, but that number is arbitrary. So the 10 buckets correspond to the 10 chapters of the book, 3 sections. The first is on careers. Chapter 1, creating a career plan. The second is working effectively. And these are skills like understanding how you create value, understanding corporate culture, understanding how to manage your manager. These are the unwritten rules, the subtle things about your job.
That's like the hidden menu at In-N-Out. That no, you don't get that at business school. You wouldn't even know about it half the time. And this is a lot of times what holds people back in their careers is nobody actually ever shares that with them. And so they're playing a board game and they don't actually have the full deck that they're playing with.
That's exactly right. And if you think about how we've trained people all throughout middle school, high school, college, your teacher or professor has said, here's all the information you need to solve this problem. And here's the problem. It might be a problem set. It might be write a 2,000-word essay on this book, whatever it is. We're defining the problem. We're giving you everything you need. We're telling you exactly what the solution needs to look like. Now go do the work. Write the essay, solve the math problem, put your answer here in this box. Very well-defined problems. And the real world, your boss says, I need you to do this. And in fact, this might not even be the right thing. It might be that, and your boss didn't even think about it. And you need to ask the right questions to find what is the real problem, changing the scope. Maybe it's a totally different scope, or maybe it is this, but slightly different. And then how do you deliver that? How do you deliver that solution you've come up with to your manager, to other people, to the customer in a way that resonates correctly? We never teach that.
No. Now, I'm curious, and maybe I'll get some folks from my academia audience that would chime in on this. Why do you think that is? Because to me, this is not, when you talk to people, they go, yeah, this is missing. And I always go, why don't we do something about that then? This is often lacking. And I think about in a lot of the programs I've led over the years, we've worked to integrate this into kind of the career development for people because we know it's lacking. Oh, I went and got my MBA. Great. But you didn't learn any of this stuff that's actually going to be relevant to your success in the organization. But this continues to be a gap in academic programs and the way we educate even our kids, things like that.
Let me climb up on my soapbox.
Yeah.
Here is, from all the research I've done, here's why things are the way they are. High school is a construct that goes back about 150 years, and the university system goes back about 1,000 years. Now, high school was really designed as we moved off the farms, because on the farm, boys learned what their dads did, girls learned what their moms did, sexist back then, and you basically learned everything you needed from your parents.
Okay.
Yes, we said, well, you should probably learn some basic reading, writing, arithmetic. So we sent you to some early education.
Okay.
But then when we moved off the farms and we moved into urban industrial environments, we said you need some basic knowledge to function in society.
Okay.
And that included things like civics. It included maybe a little more advanced math. You had to know how to calculate interest. You weren't just counting how many screws in the
Yeah.
box.
Yeah.
Calculate interest for the mortgage.
And tips for all the, excessive tipping that you need to do now.
So we came up with high school, which was really about just giving you the functionality you need to hold a basic job. And remember,
Okay.
high school, that's what most people had through the early part of the 20th century. Now, the university system I mentioned goes back about 1,000 years, and you can find older examples, you can find newer examples. So ballpark 1,000, give or take. It was created by people who had access to sets of knowledge, literal sets. Like there's a bunch of books, which are expensive and hard to find. So we're going to create a university around it. And they were knowledge centers. What's happened is the universities are run by professors. Wonderful people, but very myopic, because when you're a professor, you went from a general high school education to a BS in some field, to graduate work specializing in some subfield, to your
PhD.
thesis, where you are the world's leading expert on some tiny, tiny, tiny piece of your field.
Yeah.
And then what happens is we show up and we say, well, I want to learn marketing. So all these marketing experts, who we call professors, they say, okay, well, if you take these intro classes and these mid-level and then some of these advanced classes, if you do all that, we will give you a piece of paper that says you now have a certain level of understanding of marketing. We're not saying you're a good marketer. We're certainly not saying you are a good or effective employee. We're just saying you have acquired this level of knowledge. Okay. And that was fine for most of history. If you even go back, let's say 70 some years, mid-century in the US, we had the corporations where we were cogs in the machine. And so you as a marketing person would sit at your desk and your boss would say, here, go and do this. Say, yes, sir. Take it out of your inbox, do the work, put it in your outbox. What next, sir? And you just had to know how to do the marketing.
And you needed that advanced level of knowledge to do these slightly more advanced capabilities that you were being asked to do than just kind of the rote everyday stuff.
That was it. But now we had a change. Around the 80s into the 90s, companies got rid of middle management for various reasons. We have more dynamic teams. And it used to be your boss knew everything you did and more. But today you can imagine a 56-year-old CMO turns to his 24-year-old, fresh out of college, junior marketing person, says, what's TikTok and how do we use it? And she needs to lead that discussion. He does not know more than her about everything. And so suddenly we need different conversations with different types of people. And it's not just, do you have the knowledge? But it goes to what we were saying. Can you ask the right questions to solve the right problem and deliver it the right way? Different set of skills. But because academia moves so slowly because it's run by tenured professors, it's going to be 20 to 30 years before that finally changes and evolves. I'll get off my soapbox.
No, but I think the interesting thing about this, and this is where when I've heard critiques of the higher education academic system, to me, sometimes I go back and forth on whether, like, is there room for improvement? Yes. But in many ways, I also think it's a false set of expectations of what is really expected of, a lot of times people have this expectation, well, somebody should go to university or, get an advanced degree. They should then have the skills and all the knowledge, instead of going, well, no, this means that they have a higher degree level of knowledge that then allows them to potentially have this other stuff. But we still then have to figure out this other bridge. And sometimes I feel like mismatched expectations is actually one of the bigger issues that we have to address. Now, granted, I think there's a whole complicated mix of, if you're paying 150 grand to go get something, there is kind of this like, well, what are we getting? But I agree that I think there's a lot of complexity with it that we have to iron out.
There's even a question of what is a college education and what's it for?
Yes.
If you think, for example, let's take architecture. Architecture used to learn through a guild. You had to get into the guild, and the guilds, when you go back 1,000 some years, they were very secretive, and you had to earn your way in to learn the secrets of the universe and how
Yeah.
to create
Stand
a.
around a ring of fire and, be inducted into, some of the crazy stuff.
And then we said, okay, well, now we can move this into college, a little more widely accessible. We'll get rid of the mysticism. But then we can go further and you can say, well, just drafting. Drafting isn't architecture. Drafting is now we say, well, that's a vocational skill. You don't even need a college degree. You can get certificates or other non college programs in just drafting. So what used to be really secretive and really advanced has now gone to vocational. Even we have to look and say software. Back in the 1950s, you need a PhD to work with a computer.
Yeah.
And then that shifted and we said, well, you need a college degree. And now, of course, well, I know high school kids who can code pretty well.
Well, and I know lots of career professionals who came out of the military and did boot camps and transitioned into software engineering.
And so some software engineering is vocational. Now, there are arguments about why vocational alone is not enough. And for certain roles, you do need the fundamentals. You do need computer science. For other roles, you do not. And so then the question is, should college be teaching vocational skills? Should it be teaching in accounting the basics of accounting, or is that more vocational?
Yeah.
And they should be focused on higher level. How do you think about financial strategy? Of course, when you're 18, if you don't know any of this, you need to first wax on, wax off, get the fundamentals.
Well, and I think that was one of the challenges that you had with the educational system that we have set up, where we kind of moved to this, well, you finish high school, then you go off to college. And it's like, well, you're trying to teach these advanced strategic concepts to an audience that has limited to no life experience in any of these things. So the model got very complicated. I think another factor that plays into this is, I feel like 20, 30 years ago, what you learned in an advanced degree or things like that, the durability of some of that stuff was much more sustainable. And I look now at how quickly some things change. I mean, I know people who go through a degree program or go through something, they get out and it's like, yeah, everything you learned, that's like obsolete now because we've actually changed so much. The half-life of knowledge has even evolved significantly.
But it depends. So are you teaching the information or the thinking?
True.
So in my 2 degrees from MIT, my 2 undergrad degrees, physics and computer science. In physics, we're now doing, there are theories, there's dark energy, dark matter. We never even spoke about this.
Yes.
That all came after me. But I know the basic constructs. I understand quantum mechanics. I understand classical mechanics. I can follow the math if I had the time to get deep into it. Within computer science, MIT famously, we did not teach. Back then, C++ was the language, and then Java in the late 90s. The joke at MIT was if you wanted to learn C++, you had to take a course in the chemical engineering department. They taught C++ because they said, hey, chemical engineers, coding is more important. You should know the basics. You're going to have to do some numerical algorithms. Computer science folks, no, we're not teaching you C++. We used a language called Scheme, which no one really uses. But I said, but this is good for theory, for the learning, because there will be languages that don't exist today that we know you're going to use. And we're going to teach you the fundamental principles, agnostic of the language. And thankfully they did. And now I walk into new languages that did not exist then. So, oh, I get it. And so if you're teaching the right level,
that's fair.
Most universities, unfortunately, now MIT is kind of up there. A lot of universities
are focused on the vocational stuff. And I think that's just it. They're teaching the vocational portion that really is changing very quickly and should be democratized, which is why we see things like MOOCs and other things that have actually taken a lot of that vocational stuff and said, let's just make that available to anybody, because that's not really the strategic component, the theory and the advanced thinking that is required. That makes sense.
What we need, I've talked about in other forums, a shift in our educational system. It can't be, as you've suggested, 18 to 22, here's everything you need to know. Now go forth and have a 40-year career.
Yeah.
We need to shift to a more continuous learning model one where maybe every 10 years you go back for some intensive learning. It might be a 6-month, year-long, maybe it's full-time, maybe it's part-time. In the interim periods, you're doing some small learning as you go. Now, that might be sponsored by a company, whether it's internal company training or they give you certain dollars and you're doing it on your own, or for those who run small businesses or are on their own, it's on you. You always have to take responsibility for your career. We also need shifts in just societally that if someone does say, I'm taking 3 months off between jobs to do this, that's not a, what's this on your resume? That's where, could you not?
Why do you have a 3-month gap? And also,
or maybe it's even things like when you do that, maybe there's some mortgage relief because you're going to invest, or certain other societal and legal changes that need to happen to support a new model of continuous lifetime learning.
Okay. No, and I agree. And that's where some of the oversimplified solutions of, well, let's just do this. Like, let's just update degree programs. It's like, well, but that doesn't address some of these more complicated, nuanced problems. One of the things that you brought up, though, related to the toolkit that I think is really interesting, that ties to a theme we've talked about this. You mentioned one of your early chapters is that kind of career planning component, which goes back to even what we discussed about being successful with AI in a company is if you don't have a plan and you don't know what you're trying to accomplish and how, it becomes exponentially difficult, if not impossible, to actually advance and grow your career and develop as a professional, because it's like, well, what are you even trying to accomplish? You could end up wasting countless time and energy on something that may have an absolute negative effect on your development and your growth as a professional.
It saddens me that so many people go around without a career plan. Consider the following. Imagine your boss says to you, it's January 1st. Here is a giant critical project. 30% of our revenue depends on the success of this project. You've got a year to do it. What would you do? Now, would you say, okay, boss, great. I'll see you on December 31st. Cross your fingers. Let's hope I hit this. Recipe for disaster. Instead, you say, okay, let's do regular check-ins. And maybe that's quarterly. Maybe you have a project where you do monthly check-ins. In software, we have often Scrum and Agile methodologies where we're doing kind of course corrections every week or two. And we do this because we know things will change. Along the way, you might be going down the wrong path. You might find certain things are easier or harder than planned. In fact, your goal may change. Come August, your boss, I know he said achieve this, but I'm going to modify that slightly. And so what we do,
or the company's direction has changed and you're like, well, that's not even what we're focused on anymore.
Right. No longer go down this path. And so what we do with our projects is we say, okay, I'm going to create a project plan. Here's the goal. I then backtrack. If I need to be here December 31st, where do I need to be in November? Where in September? And you backtrack a plan. Now it's a little fuzzy. Where exactly am I going to be October 15th? I have some general idea. I can't tell you exactly, but I should know, certainly the next 2 weeks, I should have a clear idea what exactly I'm doing each day. So it's clearer up front, it's fuzzier further out, and then we continually adjust. But now how many people take their career, which is not 30% of your revenue, but 100%.
Yeah, that's 100% of your livelihood.
Isn't just 1 year, but 20, 30, 40 years. And I go, well, I hope to be a VP in 5, 10 years. Cross my fingers. Let's hope I get there. I'll check in 5 years.
Yeah.
We want to apply the same techniques of creating a plan. And what trips people, I say, how can I know what's going to happen in 5 years? Well, how do you know what's happening in October on this project? You have fuzzy placeholders and you do regular check-ins with course corrections. And so we want to apply those techniques to our career because simply crossing your fingers and hoping has very little chance of success.
I'm actually so glad we ended up drilling deeper into this because I love that as the starting point for people who may be looking at their own career right now or looking at what's going on with all the changes and things like that and saying, before you just start signing up for a master class for this or investing in going back to school to do this or heaven forbid, I'm going to go get a master's degree in AI because that's the new hype thing, that I need an AI degree now type of a thing, is actually taking the time to go, what is it that I actually want to accomplish and why? Because I think that's one of the other things that even in company projects, we often miss, where we go, we know what we think we want to do, but we never even bother to take the time to ask the question, but why? What are we hoping will be achieved by that, so that we can get into it? Because there's times where you may think you need to do something that when you get into the why, if you actually are collaborating around that, somebody else might go, I actually don't know that that's the best goal to be shooting at if that's actually what you're trying to achieve. And taking the time to slow down on that, I think, is a brilliant recommendation for anybody watching and listening, to say that actually might be where you want to spend most of your time first, so that you don't end up wasting a ton of time and energy on something that may actually get you nowhere.
Measure twice, cut once. Timeless advice.
It is the time, yeah.
And now, when we think about projects, if you ask me to go into some new area of technology, new industry, I'm going to say, boy, I am out of my depth. So first thing I'm going to do is reach out to experts. And it might be listening to podcasts and shows. It might be reading books. It might be talking to people in my network and saying, who's done this? What guidance can you give me? What's tricky? What's hard? What are the unwritten rules that people don't talk about? And I'm better prepared by speaking with people who have gone further down the path than I have. The same applies to our careers. You can go listen to shows with career advice and read books and blogs. You can also speak to people who have gone further down the path. Hey, I'd like to be a VP like you one day. What do I need? Do I need that master's degree?
Yeah.
Is it, it's a nice to have, but you don't need it. And if you do this and you're on this other path, you can skip that. You go, wow, you just saved me a lot of time and money.
Right.
So do that investigative work and talk to people. And this is another example of where your network can come back. It's not just, can you get me a job today? It can solve a whole host of problems. And this is one of them, career planning.
I think, especially in an age where, and I think what you just described right there is actually really helpful, because we are in an age where, one, I think a lot of times people misunderstand their network and the power of their network. And again, they misuse it, where it's like, oh, I'm out of a job, let me use my network to find another job. And it's like, well, yeah, that might be one thing you can do, but you're actually missing the real power of it, to actually, again, this first step of figuring out what is it you're actually trying to achieve, and talk to people who have walked that road before, so you can actually plan ahead. I mean, I think of the number of people I've talked to who maybe I've had career conversations with them where they've said, I want to accomplish, this perception of what I think you've accomplished, right? This and that. And then you dig into it and you go, well, why? Like, let me ask you some of what are you thinking of doing? And there's plenty of times where, as you get into it, they go, you know what? Actually, I don't think that is what I want to do. I had a perception of what this was. Now that I'm hearing and understanding that, I actually think I don't want that path. And I think you can actually prevent yourself from a lot of career damage, because there's nothing worse than somebody pouring countless hours, dollars, energy into something. Then you get somewhere and you go, well, this is not what I thought it was. And now I'm really miserable in what I'm doing.
I always recommend talk to people in those roles. Ask them, what's your typical day? What's your typical week? Where do you spend time? So if you think classically, we'll take an example everyone can relate to. Everyone knows what a lawyer does. At age 12, you've probably seen lawyers on TV. You're like, oh, they go to court and they do these things.
You think you know what a lawyer does.
Right. You think you're waiting for, you can't handle the truth. And wow, that is cool. But the reality is, if you're a lawyer, you are sitting probably by yourself all day in front of a computer, researching case law and redlining contracts. And so many people go to law school not knowing that. They think they're going to get all the exciting courtroom drama.
Yeah, they're going to be in an episode of Suits, drinking scotch in the evenings and, arguing the cases during the daytime.
Doctors, same thing. They love helping people. And then you talk to them, I say, I spend half my day filling out paperwork for insurance reimbursement. This is hell. And so understanding what they actually do and what you like. Maybe you do like spending half your days in meetings, and this job is half the days in meetings, and congratulations, that's the job you should go for. But understand those details, because it's not just, oh, the title and the compensation, the sexiness. It's the day to day, and that's what's going to drain you if it's misaligned to what makes you happy.
Yeah. No, I think there is some extremely timeless wisdom in that. And I think it's a misstep that many people have made over their careers where, and I mean, even if you're a seasoned professional, there's opportunity to revisit this. And I think we saw some of this happen in COVID when it first hit, where you had kind of the great reawakening where people kind of went, what am I doing with my life? I've been doing this for the last 10, 20 years, and I'm not even sure that this is where I want to be right now or what I want to be doing. And a lot of people kind of took the step back and said, all right, how do I rethink this? And some people stayed exactly where they were on the end of that journey. And others said, you know what, I think I need to make a shift.
And unfortunately, I think we're shifting too far away from that. That was a brief moment in time, and now everyone, well, we're post COVID. I'm back in the grind, in my job, in the office. We do need to do that stepping away. Here's
Yeah.
something simple you can do right now. I'm going to have you pause, but you have to promise to come back for the end of the show because we'll have more good advice. You
Yeah.
can
Go back to your scratch pad. Here you go. Bring
go
your
back to your
scratch
scratch
pad
pad,
back out where you got your
pull
little
out
chart.
pull out your cell phone, create a calendar event that says, think about my career, and set that as a recurring event for every 6 months, 3 months, even if you want more often. Set as a recurring every 6 months, 30 minutes, think about my career. And now you're going to have a regular check in where you say, am I on the path that I want? Have I talked to anyone lately about has that path changed? Or maybe I want more clarification. So you've got this point where you say, don't just blindly go down and then discover that's not the destination you wanted.
Yeah. I think that is a phenomenal, easy step that anybody can take when it comes to navigating some of this stuff. Because again, the 6 months is a cadence that's regular enough that even with all the pace of change and everything going on, you're revisiting it frequently enough that you can go, hey, you know what? Maybe things have changed. And maybe what I thought, now I'm seeing some of this other stuff happening. And I go, you know what? Maybe that isn't really the path that I want to go to. You enrolled in your degree program for prompt engineering, and 6 months later, you go, you know what? I don't know that this is really going to be a fruitful, fulfilling path for me. But it's also enough time to give you a sense of, I've had some chance to work some things out and actually see, have I made progress on the goals that I've wanted? So I think that's brilliant. And I know for myself, I'm relentless with my calendar. If something needs to happen, I have to put it on my calendar so that I remember to go, nope, I'm going to make time. And I think even just the practice of blocking time for the things that matter is fantastic.
Yeah, it helps us stay accountable to ourselves.
Okay. So with the remaining couple minutes, I am curious, any kind of parting, I think that was a phenomenal kind of like, hey, everybody, regardless of who you are, technical, non-technical, advanced in your career, just beginning your career, I think everybody can kind of do that. Let's go back to the beginning and say, where am I right now? Is where I am the right path? Am I doing the right things? Are there things I'd adjust? Any other kind of parting advice on what you're seeing based on the book, based on what you've done with, your work, things that you're seeing that you would say, here's some concluding wisdom for everybody?
This set of skills that we didn't get a chance to go to all of them, but this
Yeah, I
set of
know.
skills,
We could have done a 3-hour episode.
you need to continually develop them. And often these skills are learned not just from reading books. I say this as an author, not just from reading books, not just from hearing episodes. It's a good starting point, but they are best learned by doing. Just like playing sports, playing an instrument, you can only learn so much sitting and reading. You have to do, you have to practice. Now, there are ways you can do this at effectively low cost. There are ways where you can do scrimmage. You can do a rehearsal that's not on the job. And I talk about that. There's some resources on the website that will help you do it. Maybe we'll do
Okay.
another episode. We can get more into
Yeah.
that. But do say, I need to work on these. The fact that you tune into a show like this every week is fantastic. The fact that you buy books or read blogs, that's great. But that's the start of your education, not the end of your education.
You know what? I couldn't have ended that better myself, because that is something as a theme that I'm continually trying to drive as a leader of continuous development. Is I've actually seen so many times over the year, and the term for it's the Dunning-Kruger effect. There's actually a negative effect that can happen when all you do is consume more knowledge, but you never apply it, which is you think you're a lot better at things than you are. And it's the higher you climb that mountain, the harder you hit when you hit the ground, when you actually have to do it and you go, wow, I thought I was a wizard at this. And I've spent the last few years reading and studying about, I've never done it. And then you go do it and you learn the hard way. Wow, I guess I really don't know anything about it, because that's where your journey begins.
I read how to climb Everest. Just put me at the base of the mountain and let me go.
Just put a pack on me and let's do this. I'm sure I'll be fine. So, no, I love it. And definitely, I think we will absolutely reconnect and go deeper on this. But I so appreciate this. I love the diversity of the conversation that we had and where we went with it. So, thank you so much for joining me, Mark. I always enjoy our conversations. And I think everybody had some really practical takeaways that they can also apply, in addition to some of the bigger kind of knowledge nuggets that came from it. So thank you for joining me.
Thanks for having me on the show.
All right, everybody. Well, thank you so much for tuning in. If you didn't catch the whole thing, catch the live replay on all the other channels, or watch for my Substack later this week, where I will drop my reflections on this conversation. And with that, I hope you have a wonderful rest of the week, and I will see you on the other side.